Every single time you buy a McDonald's hamburger, you are funding a real estate empire that dwarfs traditional property tycoons. The truth is, McDonald's does not sell fast food. They sell debt, dominance, and high-interest dirt. While the general public thinks franchisees are independent small business owners achieving the American dream, they are actually trapped in a financial coliseum. McDonald's corporate buys the land, marks up the rent, and forces their own operators into a system where failure is virtually guaranteed for the weak, and compliance is the only way to survive. It is a masterclass in corporate feudalism, disguised under a happy yellow smile. If you want to understand how billionaires actually lock down monopolies without ever inventing a new product, you need to understand the dark art of the McDonald's lease. Once you see the math behind the curtain, the entire fast food industry looks less like a restaurant business and more like a syndicate. Let us completely rewire how you think about the golden arches right from the start. When you drive past a McDonald's, what do you see? You see a drive-through lane, a bright yellow sign, a kid eating a Happy Meal, and a guy flipping patties inside. Your brain automatically categorizes that building into the exact same bucket as your local pizza joint, a mom-and-pop diner, or a neighborhood coffee shop. You assume they make their money the exact same way every other restaurant on earth makes money. They buy raw ingredients like beef, buns, lettuce, and secret sauce. They cook them up, and they sell them to you for a profit margin of a few cents on the dollar. You figure that if they sell enough burgers, the owner gets rich. But that fundamental assumption is precisely how corporate McDonald's wants you to look at the world. Because as long as you think they are in the burger business, you will never see the massive, multi-billion-dollar real estate hustle happening right in front of your face. The reality is that McDonald's is not a restaurant company at all. In fact, if you ask the executives at the top of the food chain what their primary business is, they wouldn't talk about burgers, fries, or the McRib. They would tell you, flat out, that they are a real estate company. But even calling them a real estate company feels a little too polite. A real estate company usually buys land, builds apartments or office complexes, and collects rent. McDonald's takes that concept and supercharges it with a level of corporate engineering that borders on psychological warfare against its own business partners. They have built a system where they act as the ultimate landlord, extracting maximum wealth from the very people wearing their uniforms and selling their food. It is a brilliant, terrifyingly effective machine that turns humble burger joints into high-yield financial assets. To understand how we got here, we have to look back at the man who didn't actually invent McDonald's, but absolutely invented the trap that made it a global superpower: Ray Kroc. Picture the scene in the mid-1950s. Ray Kroc is a traveling milkshake mixer salesman pushing multi-blenders to diners across America. He stumbles upon a revolutionary little burger stand in San Bernardino, California, run by the McDonald brothers, Dick and Mac. These brothers had invented the Speedy Service System, a hyper-efficient assembly line for food that pumped out burgers in seconds instead of minutes. Kroc is completely mesmerized. He sees the potential for a nationwide empire, pitches himself to the brothers as their franchise agent, and starts selling McDonald's locations across the country. But there is a massive problem with Kroc's early business model. Under their original agreement, the McDonald brothers were taking a tiny fraction of a percent of the gross sales as a royalty, and Kroc was taking a cut of that to run his franchise expansion. The problem was that Kroc's cut was so small, and the overhead of running a growing company was so high, that Kroc was practically bleeding cash. He wasn't getting rich. He was struggling to pay his own bills. He had a revolutionary product, a growing army of franchisees, and a bank account that was rapidly heading towards zero. Enter a man named Harry Sonneborn. If Ray Kroc is the face of McDonald's, Sonneborn is the architectural genius who built the vault. Sonneborn was a financial wizard who looked at Kroc's struggling balance sheet and diagnosed the core issue instantly. He told Kroc a truth that would change corporate history forever. He said, "Look, Ray, you are not making any money on the hamburgers. The franchisees are keeping the profit from the food, and the brothers are taking the tiny royalty. You are essentially doing all the heavy lifting for pennies. But what you can do, and what you must do, is change the entire financial structure of how a store gets built. Sonneborn's brilliant predatory insight was this: McDonald's corporate should not sell franchises. McDonald's corporate should buy the real estate under the franchises. Here is how the Sonneborn model worked, and it is still the exact engine driving McDonald's today. When a new franchisee wanted to open a McDonald's, they didn't just sign a licensing agreement to sell burgers. They entered a master lease arrangement. McDonald's corporate would go out, find a prime piece of real estate on a busy street corner, buy the land outright, or sign a long-term master lease with the original landowner, and then build the restaurant building on it. Then, and this is the crucial part, McDonald's would lease that exact piece of land and building back to the franchisee. Think about the audacity of that move for a second. Instead of helping a local entrepreneur buy their own building so they can build generational wealth, McDonald's corporate becomes their landlord. They act as the middleman between the actual owner of the dirt and the person flipping the burgers. Or in many cases, McDonald's is the actual owner of the dirt. Let's look at the financial architecture of this trap, because this is where the genius and the brutality truly intersect. Every single month, a McDonald's franchisee has to pay two major streams of cash back to corporate. First, they pay a standard royalty fee for the right to use the brand name and the operational systems, which usually hovers around 4 to 5% of their total gross sales. That sounds fair enough. Every franchise system does something similar. But then comes the real kicker, the rent. The franchisee has to pay rent to McDonald's corporate. And this isn't just regular rent calculated to cover the mortgage or market rate. McDonald's typically charges rent based on a percentage of the store's gross sales, or a steep fixed base rent, whichever happens to be higher. If sales go up because the franchisee is working 60 hours a week, marketing locally, and running a tight ship, the rent goes up too. This creates an unbelievable asymmetric advantage for corporate. If a franchisee has a bad month, maybe road construction blocks the entrance, or the local economy takes a massive hit, the franchisee still has to pay their rent to corporate. If they can't pay, McDonald's doesn't try to help them restructure. They evict them, take back the keys, and hand the turnkey operation over to a new franchisee who has fresh capital to burn. Corporate never loses. They own the land. If one operator fails, the real estate value remains, the building is still there, and a new sucker steps up to the plate to take over the lease. It is a completely risk-free mechanism for the parent company, subsidized entirely by the sweat, blood, and capital of the local business owner. To really grasp how dominant this strategy is, you have to look at the numbers. McDonald's owns an ungodly amount of physical dirt. We are talking about tens of thousands of locations globally, with a vast majority of the land and buildings sitting directly on corporate's balance sheet as assets. In fact, if you look at McDonald's annual reports, a massive chunk of their multi-billion-dollar revenue doesn't come from selling fries or chicken nuggets at all. It comes straight from rental income. They are literally one of the biggest commercial landlords in the world, ranking right alongside massive global real estate investment trusts, except they don't have to deal with empty office spaces or retail tenants going bankrupt because their tenants are legally contract-bound to sell billions of dollars worth of fast food to cover the rent. Let that sink in for a moment. McDonald's corporate forces its own business partners to generate enough revenue through selling cheap food just so they can pay rent to the mothership. It's a closed-loop ecosystem. McDonald's supplies the brand, sure, but they also supply the literal ground you are standing on, and they profit off you coming and going. When you buy a Big Mac, a portion of that money goes to pay the franchisee's employees, a portion goes to buy the ingredients from corporate-approved suppliers, a portion goes to the royalty fee, and a massive chunk goes straight into the corporate real estate coffer. It is a masterclass in leveraging corporate power to eliminate downside risk while capturing almost all the upside. Now, let's talk about the psychological and financial trap this creates for the individual who signs up to become a franchisee. When people hear the word franchisee, they often picture a wealthy entrepreneur who bought their way into a license and is now sitting back on a beach letting cash roll in. Nothing could be further from the truth, especially at the entry level. To even be considered for a McDonald's franchise, you need a substantial amount of liquid capital, usually hundreds of thousands of dollars of your own unborrowed cash just to qualify. You have to go through Hamburger University, learn the strict corporate dogma, and prove you are willing to follow every single operational rule down to the exact temperature of the fry vats. Once you get approved and put your life savings on the line to open your store, you quickly realize you are not an independent business owner at all. You are a high-stress, high-accountability middle manager who happens to be personally liable for millions of dollars in debt. If you want to remodel your dining room because the carpet is worn out, you can't just call a local contractor and get a good deal. You have to use corporate-approved vendors who charge premium rates. If you want to change your operating hours, you need permission. You are bound by a rigid, iron-fisted contract that gives corporate ultimate control over your destiny. And the sword hanging over your head the entire time is the lease. If you fall out of favor with corporate, or if your sales dip because you push back against a corporate mandate, they can use lease violations or non-renewal clauses to squeeze you out of the system entirely, walking away with the profitable location while you are left holding an empty bag of financial ruin. This dynamic has led to intense legal battles and deep-seated resentment behind the scenes that the polished television commercials will never show you. Over the years, franchisee associations have formed to push back against what they describe as predatory rent hikes and unfair supply chain mandates. Operators have argued that corporate uses its real estate leverage to bully them into accepting lower profit margins, while corporate pockets record profits. When your landlord is also the company that controls your supply chain, sets your menu, dictates your marketing, and holds the power to terminate your license, you don't have a business partnership. You have a dictatorship. But because the brand is so powerful and the promise of steady fast food revenue is so alluring, there is always a line of eager applicants waiting to take the place of anyone who gets chewed up and spit out by the system. This brings us to the broader economic lesson of the McDonald's lease model. Because this isn't just a story about burgers and fries, it is a blueprint for modern corporate monopoly and wealth extraction. Ray Kroc and Harry Sonneborn figured out something profound about capitalism. The people who own the underlying infrastructure always win, no matter what happens to the product or the end consumer. In the modern economy, we see this exact same playbook being run by tech companies, digital platforms, and massive conglomerates. Think about app stores taking a 30% cut of every transaction, or real estate tech platforms buying up entire suburban neighborhoods to rent them back to the people who used to be able to afford homes. It is all the same trick. You don't innovate by building a better product. You dominate by controlling the choke points of the physical or digital landscape. When you look at McDonald's through this lens, the iconic status of the brand takes on a completely different flavor. Those golden arches are not just a symbol of fast food convenience, they are a monument to financial engineering. They represent a system where corporate power was successfully divorced from operational risk. Think about the brilliance of that from a shareholder's perspective. If there is a global recession, people stop buying luxury cars and designer clothes, but they might still buy a cheap dollar menu burger. If inflation spikes, McDonald's corporate just raises the rent or lets the franchisees figure out how to squeeze margin out of cheaper ingredients, while corporate's massive real estate portfolio continues to appreciate in value. The real estate acts as a permanent hedge against inflation, economic downturns, and market volatility. And that is why Wall Street absolutely adores McDonald's. Institutional investors don't look at McDonald's as a restaurant stock competing with Wendy's or Burger King. They look at it as a hybrid between a high-yield corporate bond and a blue-chip real estate trust. The cash flows are predictable, the assets are tangible and inflation-proof, and the profit margins on the rental income are astronomical. When you buy a share of McDonald's stock, you aren't betting on the future of the beef industry. You are betting on the continuous, unrelenting extraction of rent from thousands of business operators around the globe who have nowhere else to go. So the next time you pull up to a drive-through speaker, take a second to look around at the physical space. Look at the asphalt you are parked on. Look at the concrete foundation. Look at the walls holding up the roof. Understand that none of that belongs to the person handing you your bag of food. That dirt belongs to an international machine that figured out how to turn a simple hamburger stand into a perpetual motion machine of real estate wealth. It's cold, It's calculated, and it is arguably one of the most brilliant business tricks in human history. The burger is just the bait. The lease is the trap. And once you see how the game is actually played, you will never look at fast food the same way again.